next game. So I did happen to get to exactly 2,000 off screen, since you're probably noticing that. Finally, a game is black. That's great. I do plan to post basically every game I play, as long as it actually has some relevance. So if I just play, super low quality games or stuff that just doesn't fit our opening standards, then I won't, but for the most part I'll post everything. And then yeah, this was that line where they play e5, we played d5. Knight c3, I think this is a line where, do we have the option to take on e4? Or are we just playing some safe e6? I think actually it's knight c6 first. And then it's one where if they play e5, we go knight g4. But these I know are a little hard to keep track of. a3 is super strange. And should not concern us, I feel. Okay, so we can get along with castling. I think we're still okay to allow e5. I've been keeping an eye on that, but there should always be knight g4, because with this bishop we have 3 attackers. So this is never worth it for white to play that. This, I recall, there are a couple moments we want to play h6 before they play queen d2 to make sure they can't get into h6. Especially if they take the knight, I think something with knight d4 could be quite effective. And if not, probably we turn to d6, maybe to e5 afterwards. Could argue for knight h5, but I think just bishop at e3, and we don't get a lot out of that. So let's just finish our pawn structure the way we know it. And yeah, queen d2, always there is king h7. Which, as it happens, is away from a pin from this bishop, but I don't think that's a problem. This suggests they are a very aggressive player. And I can imagine they want to play knight g5. Which I don't think should come to anything in particular. Just that it is an option. So at that point we are safe to just move the king back, and they aren't pointing at that h6 pawn. So is it worth playing e5, push them to e3, and at that point h4 could make more sense, because we should catch that bishop. If they give a check, we come back, and same thing, that bishop is just stuck on e3. So that might be a good way to defuse any kind of attack. I'm not worried about them taking on h7, that would just be giving up material. So I think knight g4. I don't think h5 is necessary, although maybe we could play that, just to really shut down white's play, and they don't have a great way of stopping this knight g4 anyways. Like they'd have to play maybe queen e2, but then knight d4. Or I guess there's bishop g5 as well. So knight g4, yeah, I think I'm just not really worried about that. Knight g5, come back, and at that point I would be very happy to take the bishop and then take the knight, so let's go with that. White's playing super fast. You can very easily tell they're an aggressive, thoughtless attacker. And then for this, do we take the bishop? Do we play g5? If they take on g6, I think I'm okay with that. I know there's still the knight g5s, but I might prefer to keep things closed. I don't think there is a good reason to allow the h-file to open. What about a sacrifice on g5? g5, maybe knight takes, bishop takes, queen has to move, they get an h6. Doesn't look great, honestly. So without having a ton of time to think about it, I think I do like this. And I think their best chance would be to take on g6 first, definitely. And then they take on e3. Has to be with the queen. Nah, not with the pawn. Then what's your queen doing as far as attacking? Which might just give me time for like bishop g4 and even h5. If the knight moves, should just be getting in the way of some other things, and their knight and bishop are not in a good position to help with any kind of attack either. Like they can play knight d5, but that's as far as that's going. I think I like bishop g4 first, yeah. It's a little odd to try to open both the g and h files, like if they castle queenside. Partly I'm hoping they play knight h2, and then we can even throw in queen h4. But yeah, they're all in, which is not a surprise. I just don't think they should have enough to attack with. Actually, how about this? How about I play rook takes knight? Because then when they take, we can play bishop takes, and then we get off one of their rooks, as opposed to playing bishop takes knight. They don't have any strange moves. So rook takes, pawn takes, takes, maybe like queen h2, but even then, they can't double up on the g6 pawn. And even if they could, maybe g5 would be really solid. So I think that looks like the best way to squish their attack. I don't have a ton of defenders, but if one of their rooks is gone, then it should be really hard for them to overwhelm me. And again, knight d5, okay, that's great, but it doesn't have a great way into any kind of attack. And they can't not take this, I think, because then they're just giving up a full piece. Like queen e2, even rook g3. So let's assume they do, as they finally tick under 5 minutes. There's a massive gulf between our times, which we should probably both be in. But this is one of my habits. I take a bunch of time, and I get a good position, and then I just have to hold on to it. So I don't know which piece they move here. Rook f1, I guess makes sense now that I see it. I was surprised for a moment, but they can come into f7 as one of the big points. So I have to grab that. And how do I mitigate any rook f7? I like queen g5. Because we're attacking e3, maybe they're compelled to defend that, and then I basically just want to play rook f8. Counter the open file, and if I can do that successfully, then I should be comfortably winning. Because I just don't have a good way to stop rook f7 if they are insistent. But even if they do it here, like, okay, it's probably a good practical move, but then I'm grabbing another pawn with check. Might let them take on b7. Especially because then knight a5, this knight hasn't been doing anything, so if that's a fork, I can grab their bishop. Knight d5 makes some sense, activates the knight and protects the pawn, but it does give me time to play rook f8. And if we go takes, takes, queen f1, then I can play king g7. I have to be really careful, though, about queen f7. Do I actually want to do that? Do I have much of a choice? Because I can't play queen e7, unfortunately. I could just put the bishop back on g7, which is a little bit stupid, but I think we'll be okay. Either way, I really want to challenge the f-file, and if they're not taking it, I think I'm very happy to see that. So queen could come back, or I could play queen h5. Let's try to trade queens. I'm playing this much tighter than I would like to. And if they don't trade queens, I think then I get in g5. And if I can tuck the queen on g6, that seems like a really nice shelter. Close to what we would say is consolidating. Because it has still been loose. This isn't a hugely clear-cut game, but we'll try to gain a couple seconds here. And maybe even queen f3 is an even better consolidation, because we're limiting white's activity as we do that. Yeah, especially if we can try to bully them into a queen trade. Have to be careful about any queen takes g5 or rook takes g5 if there's a pin, but there currently is not. And I don't like that my minor pieces aren't really doing anything, but neither are theirs, so that's still kind of balanced. But then how do I actually progress is the tough question. If I want to start pushing the g-pawn, maybe. That we're going to bully again. Okay, then that gives me a moment to breathe. Why don't we start with a6 and just see what they want to do. Try to play b5. Okay, so they could play knight e6, but we can start by grabbing with check, and then we can try pushing their queen around again. They could play knight e6 now, because if I take the queen, they take the rook with check, but I can just move the rook. And I don't mind them taking the bishop, because they aren't doubled on h6. So I don't need to worry about that. And queen h2, yeah, I'm going to play queen f2 again. And now knight e6, we do take the queen, because it's not protected. And now I get to play knight d4, because that pawn is gone, so I can finally move forward, but we're going to snap that, for sure. And then these pawns, I think, should move pretty quickly. So we'll start with a check. Be aware of d4 with a discovery, but that shouldn't be a thing. I could play b5 first, maybe. But then they come around into f5, so let's not allow that so easily. If c3, you can play knight f3, gain a tempo on the rook. And we are into a conversion. So it's definitely settled down. I shouldn't be in much risk at all. Again, being very aware of any d4s. Good to remind myself of that. I don't think I play b5 unless I'm provoked, because then the a6 pawn is weak, although if their knight's distracted all the way over here, that's probably not something I need to be concerned about. And I kind of wanted to play knight h4 anyways, because it takes away that f5 square if their bishop comes around, even though it does block one of the passed pawns. And maybe we try to bully a little longer. Get away from their bishop and keep trying to trade their best pieces. Okay, so how do I actually get these pawns moving? I guess we'll say king. And then h5 and g4. Knight doesn't really bother me, but I can't play h5 yet because they would take the bishop and then I'd lose the g5 pawn. I shouldn't have given away that pawn. That was just a time mistake. But it gives me an excuse to play b5 at least. And start to push. So shouldn't be a huge problem in the grand scheme of things, especially because their knight, once again, doesn't really have a square. Knight f5, I can take that, just not rook takes because of bishop to e4, but king takes, I think would be fine. And if I get to play g4, king g5, I'm going to feel much safer. Even though they do have a passed, or not a passed pawn, an extra pawn on the other side, they would be very slow to make a passed pawn. And maybe rook f2 would be useful too, especially if they push that b pawn. So I'm sure this is not the sharpest technique, but I'm going to play a5 just to draw their knight away, because the bishop might come back a little faster than the knight. And then, yeah, I'll speed up with my kingside pawns. Potentially, do I get to play rook b8 actually? No, not really, because their bishop can protect the knight. Not knight d6 because of bishop f8, I believe. But now we're, I think, getting somewhere. Even though we have dropped 2 pawns, these 2 pawns are still much faster. Because my rook is always watchful if it needs to be, while theirs should be getting trampled pretty quickly. I think we can take once or even twice. Actually, that does give me a pawn back, which I think is worth taking. So otherwise, pushing the d pawn, it's starting to move kind of quickly. Bishop e5 might be a really nice blockading square. But I think we just push the pawn. Their tactical tricks shouldn't be very pointed. That is fine, because we're just promoting. Still no real checks, and rook c1, now there's rook f1. And they're too slow to push the e-pawn out of the way. And this one, yeah, we just come with the port. If they give a check, I guess, I could play king f4, even though it blocks my rook. I'm in plenty of time to catch up to the pawn. Sort of a trick, but there's no fork on f3. So promote, or you know what, we're just going to grab the knight. Not even risk any kind of fork. Either way works. Okay. Not a terrible game. I don't think that was extremely clean, and actually I forgot about the analysis that they're going to run, but oh well. We will make do. So classic bishop c4 opening, which is not common, I believe, at higher levels, but we see a lot low and mid ladder. And I'll double check, but I think I am supposed to play knight c6 first. I know that's definitely the habit over bishop g7, just that I don't think this is a position where we push any of the pawns. And then, yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, the low depth machine definitely says a3 already is off track. And since it looks like it's finished, yeah, a couple of mistakes in the middle. Probably once where you go up some advantage, but we'll come to that in a bit. So bishop g7, d3, castles. Okay, so you know what? Let's jump into the opening right away, since this was not extremely deep with move 5, a3, which is pretty far down the list of moves. So let's jump into this now. Finally, a different chapter. We get to look at the knight f3 ones, even though they did play bishop c4. So knight f6, we were correct, because we know we like to attack the pawn on e4 when we can. They played knight to c3, and then knight c6, and that is as far as we got. So as far as what white normally does, yeah, d3, d4 castles. And in general, we are playing bishop g7, but yeah, we did, or I did refer to, at least at one point when they played d4, that we do have this trick with knight takes e4. And I guess the other point I should mention, yes, if they ever play e5, then we had d5. I think that covers our biggest points for this particular line. Because yeah, this, and e5, yeah, just isn't as much of a move here, but even if they did, I'm assuming it would be knight g4? Maybe not actually, okay. d5 I guess still works, because we do have the knight protecting it for the moment. So I'd probably favor that, since it does follow our pattern the best, but as you can see, you could get away with a couple other moves. Just that maybe it's not the best time for knight g4, I suppose. Although the scores do show it's good, so we will leave that part there. So d3 castles, and yeah, this should just be pretty good for black. Like, this is pretty unchallenging. We've gotten the setup that we like, just that they went recklessly into an attack, and I had to be ready for that. So still decent number of games up to this point. And then knight g4. I don't know. I don't like relying on these numbers because they're always run at a very low depth, so not a very powerful engine. Yeah, it's kind of hard to go through this twice, so maybe I will just flip this on as we start. But h6, yeah, we said that because if you don't, then not that it's bad, but queen d2, and you do have to answer a few more bishop h6s. So it's good to get ahead of that when we can. d6 is standard, king h7 protects that, and then h4, yeah. Again, not particularly sound play, but if it's your style, then sure, go for it. So e5 seems okay, but maybe not so much in h4, yeah. Knight h5. Guess we could do that here, and that really blocks up the king side as well. Because we can still play potentially bishop g4, although maybe not if that walks into knight h2 g4. But also I mentioned there's some knight d4s showing up. That's just generally a good score for the knight if we have a moment, which we didn't really in the game. But they got a little too aggressive with h5. Because, I don't know, I would not have been unhappy. Like I mentioned, if they move the queen, I think maybe not at this exact move, but even if they do, and knight d4, but even taking this I felt was pretty reasonable for white. And now it makes more sense, I think, to play f takes, because that doesn't block queen. The queen's on the light squares now. I'm a little interested to see that that really has dwindled down the advantage once the machine runs for a second. Okay, so we maybe would favor knight d4 instead. And I did actually mention that at one point, because yeah, that really chases around their queen. They don't really want to play bishop takes, but they can't play knight takes, because that obviously is a pretty classic mistake with a pawn fork. H5, yeah, I'm supposed to play G5, okay. What did I say? I think I was worried about a sacrifice, but if you have to allow it, you have to allow it. Because this one, was it knight takes, I think? Which, yeah, you can tell. The two players who have gotten here before, of course, that's got to be the point if we're going to play into this. And then bishop f6, but I also like bishop h6. That's a clever one, because even though our queen is attacked, we'd be eyeing their queen as well. And if we get to trade off a piece, I think we're feeling happy about that. I didn't want to just move the queen because I mentioned something with h6, yeah. And then I guess they can't really push our king out of the way, but it still didn't feel right to allow any of that. Is there any other point here? Not really. I mean, this makes sense as well, actually, because either way we are forcing a trade of this bishop, because it just doesn't have a square to retreat to, since we are attacking e3, that was our whole point. Okay, so let's come back to this. Yeah, I thought takes was correct first. Okay, it seems like they can play it either way. We did kind of feel that this pawn was annoying for a while, that we couldn't play any knight to d4. Bishop g4 castles, and yeah, look at that. Rook takes f3. Not just a good move, but the only good move. Anything else in white might actually have some play. So that might be a good lesson here, because I'm sure a lot of people would play just bishop takes, but I would have been very scared of the open files. And okay, specifically queen g2 first, because that attacks the rook, and then when it comes back, then they get a quick rook g1. And we're not very happy, because we'd like to defend with queen f6, but then their knight would finally make itself shown, I think. And this would not be looking good for black, because it's really hard to hang on to this pawn, and we don't really want to step towards that bishop. And if we don't take that pawn, I mean, not going to be a whole lot better, because we've still opened the g file for no good reason. So rook takes, definitely. Takes, I don't know, 2 moves of calculation, but not too hard to understand it. And then we just had to make sure to finish off this defense, which, yeah, we did feel like it was going to take a while, as we experienced in the game, but we can start by activating the queen. And what did I think? I know I wanted to play rook f8. I guess we should consider the rook f7. I know this pawn is still hanging, but yeah, this seems like it's just a good way to get the rook into the game. If they'd taken here, I'd mentioned there was maybe knight a5. And if we get rid of this bishop, that is going to help our king feel a decent bit safer. Although we're starting to lose track of the pawn count if we go down that road. And again, yeah, we do really have to play rook f8. And I had mentioned I was concerned about if they had taken and played queen to f1. Okay, and look at that. I was going to say, yeah, worst comes to worst, I can play bishop g7, and once again, that is even the only move. So I do think I would have played that. And then if they'd played queen f7, yeah, I would have played h5 as well, because if we don't, then we got to be really careful about queen g8 checkmates if this knight moves. But if we get an h5, that's never going to be a problem, because the king would actually be really safe on h6, in most cases at least. Because if we don't, then I guess we'd be probably playing king g7, but then very quickly, yeah, there's this knight c7, and there's a check, and then there's a mate, and it's difficult to defend. I guess we could play queen e7, but then there's knight e6, and we can't keep the bishop protected because this would be a discover check as they capture that piece. So that would not have gone well for black. So I was anticipating fairly well, I guess. Queen h5 was not a great bailout. Queen h4, because we don't actually want to trade queens. Or, well, we do want to trade queens, but not in that circumstance. Okay, so why is this a total loss of advantage? I mean, I guess the doubled h-pawns don't look very nice. Knight c7 threatens knight e6 again, so we would move the rook. I would not play knight d8. I think I probably would play rook f2. And then knight e6. Oh, and I guess that's really spooky. Hey, if we played bishop f6, there is a mate in 2. So that's a very nasty surprise. Okay, so we are seeing that, yeah, this was not actually a good way to lock down the position, because suddenly white is actually able to coordinate their 3 remaining pieces, and black, well, all 3 I think of black's pieces are doing very different things right now. So it turns out white did have that opportunity, but they did not take it because I think we were both playing on the general grounds of we don't want to trade queens, or they don't want to, I do want to, and then not g5 either. Okay, so we're definitely making some mistakes in this game. Not that it's the perfect defense, but again, being low under 10 seconds does not lend itself to playing perfect moves. So, okay, but once they do not play, yeah, that knight c7, just trying to get something out of both of these 2 pieces. I definitely said that a couple times during the game, that they weren't doing anything. Well, they should have done something with those 2. Knight c7, and again, this e6 square is not that easy for white, or for black to defend. This time, maybe I would have come up with knight d8, because the knight's not doing anything on c6, well, at least it can guard d6. Okay, let's continue with the actual conversion, and from here, it looks like I was doing a better job. Even a6 is fine. That, yeah, rook f2 I think is a fair point as well, where we're saying maybe we have a chance to attack on the queen side, although if they play bishop b3, I guess knight d4 should be strong, so that they can't actually hold on to c2. So yeah, that's fair as well. But I was thinking about queens first anyways, and is there one last chance, it looks like, judging by the evaluation, to get in this knight e6. But I thought I wasn't supposed to take their queen. Ah, okay, you know what? I didn't see that knight takes g5 was a threat. I had mentioned that pawn being captured, but again, not by the knight. I would have played, well, I don't know if I would have played it, but I was definitely thinking I would play rook f6. That would lose the game, because I didn't want to take on h1, because this is a check, and then they take the queen, but again, it's not, we're happy to play it, but at that point it would have been the best available. So I was not careful enough really around these light squares. Like, I don't have a light square bishop, obviously, but that is impressive, I think, that they really could have done a lot of damage through there at a few different moments. But as I said, they did miss that, and now I think we're clean, because we can take that, and then they just didn't have time to connect their pieces again. So knight comes forward, chases around the rook. I think, yeah, in retrospect, I think I probably should have just played h5, h4. That would have gotten things to move along faster. I was just thinking if I want to play b5, then maybe their bishop comes around here. So I was hoping to guard that, but definitely not necessary. I mean, it's not like what I did was bad, just that it wasn't entirely necessary. So yeah, king comes forward. If they play random move, I was ready to play h5 and g4. So knight e8, I said I could not do that anymore because they could take this bishop, and then I'm losing one of the pawns, even if I should still have good chances with the remaining one. King h6. Rook f8. Yeah, I didn't notice that d6 was unprotected, which was a little silly, but I guess bishop f8 would be a little more clinical, just to make sure we don't give up that pawn, and then there's probably nothing against getting moving here. We're still okay. We're still at a pretty healthy -3, looks like the whole way, because again, these 2 pawns, they're connected passed pawns. White, while they have the same number of pawns, at least up to here, they just don't make the same impression. I mentioned I could start with bishop e5, another good option. g3, if they give a check, that's fine. It would have been kind of similar to what the game was, I guess, just with the pawn 1 square further back. If they give another one, either way, probably I would have played king g4, just because I was looking at rook c1, rook to f1. Though I did also say king f4 is completely fine because king g3, and there's still no good way to stop one of these, and the pawn will cost them a rook. But takes, and yeah, that is, I think, a very clear game over. So if we want takeaways from this one, I remembered most of our big ideas as far as this construction with bishop c4, as far as whether white plays e5, and when we're considering either d5 in response or potentially knight g4. And a3 is just a slow move. If we see slow random moves, we can usually assume we're doing pretty okay. As far as where I made a mistake, it was a little bit with defending, which we're not going to say is always super easy, but I did have to, at this point at least, allow some kind of sacrifice and just understand it's not actually dangerous, but I just wasn't willing to invest more time than I already had. yeah, they did get some attacking chances, which went in both directions. I was never, I think, in any severe danger, if that is correct. I don't think white ever had an actual advantage, but they definitely had chances to put me in very sharp positions where I would have had to find good defensive moves, which, as we saw from the analysis, I would have seen a couple, but not all. So perhaps a little bit fortunate that it went more or less smoothly, but an imperfect game. Perhaps still a good demonstration. I hope that that involves an attack and defense, although not a classical version as far as the Sicilian goes. So we will leave that one there. If you have any questions about the game, of course, you can let me know in comments, and I will see you for the next game.